Hi everyone, Mrs. Bilo here. In this video, I'm going to be going over the cell history and organelle notes, the first 10 slides, just to introduce cells and make connections back to the previous unit on biochemistry and the intro to cells, or intro to bio unit. So first thing, all living things are made of cells, whether that is one cell, unicellular, or many cells, multicellular. And cells, remember, can do these characteristics of life. Okay, these are the characteristics of life we talked about in the intro to bio unit. So they can carry out metabolism, building and breaking down those macromolecules, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids, carbohydrates. Cells can reproduce, they can make more of themselves. They can respond to stimuli, so changes in the outside environment or internal environment, and they can maintain homeostasis, and they can also evolve. And remember that all cells have these four things: DNA, a cell membrane, ribosomes, and the cytoplasm. Okay, all cells have those things. All cells are considered alive. All cells metabolize, reproduce, and develop and grow, respond to stimuli, maintain homeostasis, and evolve. So in our previous unit, we were talking more about molecules and atoms, okay? And now we're going to look at how those things put together are going to make up organelles and cells. So we're kind of going up this way in terms of those levels of organization. Now, some of you may have seen a generic, I'm going to go to this real quick, a picture of a cell like this. Okay, usually this is what I use when I'm teaching cells. It's more like just a generic cell. This could apply to any cell. In reality, real cells, they're going to have different shapes and structures depending on what they are meant to do. So here are what cells actually can look like, okay? So here we have some red blood cells and white blood cells. Here we have some skin cells, nervous tissue neurons like brain cells, things like that. Skeletal muscle. So like when you think of like muscle in your arms, for example, that's skeletal muscle. You have your small intestine is lined with cells. And then this is from a plant, so non-animal example. We have leaf cells. And in humans, on average, because we're multicellular organisms, we have about 3.7 trillion cells, and that's what this number would look like, which is a lot of cells. But you could have something like a bacteria cell that is just made up of one cell and is still alive. Again, this diagram right here is generic, okay? We just use it for teaching purposes, when in reality, cells really come in many different shapes and sizes, like we see here and like we see up here. We just use this for a teaching tool because those are the things that the stuff that's inside of the cell is what pretty much all of these cells have. So here's some more examples. These aren't real life images. These are diagrams. Again, many different shapes and sizes. And cells, remember that by definition, are the smallest unit of life. They're the smallest thing we can say is alive. They can carry out all the processes of life. So what I mean is metabolism. They can evolve. They can reproduce, and they can respond to the stimuli and maintain homeostasis. So basically the characteristics of life is what I mean by that. All living things are made up of cells: one cell, unicellular, multicellular, many cells. And again, they come in many shapes and sizes. And again, as I said previously, all cells have these four, like minimum to be a cell, you have to have these four things. And then depending on the type of cell, they might have more different types of organelles and also different shapes and sizes. This is kind of like the thing that all cells would have in common. Like if you had a Venn diagram, those four things would be in the middle here. And then it depends on the type of cell you're talking about, what else they might have that's different. So DNA, cytoplasm, cell membrane, ribosomes. And again, we can have unicellular organisms. So things like these, we have our prokaryotic cells, like a bacteria is prokaryotic and unicellular. Some types of blue-green bacteria is also known as cyanobacteria or blue-green algae. A paramecium and an amoeba are also unicellular, but they're considered eukaryotes. Our cells as humans, our cells are what you call eukaryotic cells. And the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells is these cells tend to be more simple versus eukaryotic cells are more complex. And so all multicellular organisms are made up of eukaryotic cells. And then the only example of a eukaryotic cell that's unicellular we have are the paramecium and the amoeba. And again, prokaryotic cells, like I said, are very simple. They don't have a nucleus. They do have DNA, that's true, but they don't have, it doesn't get housed in the nucleus like our cells have in eukaryotic cells, which have a nucleus. And then we have a lot of organelles, which we're going to talk about in this unit, in our eukaryotic cells, whereas prokaryotic cells don't have as many organelles. But both, of course, have a cell membrane. So I zoom in here. So both cells have the cytoplasm, DNA, the cell membrane. Both would also have ribosomes. I know it's not shown in the picture. That's a type of organelle. It's just that eukaryotic cells have other different types of organelles that are membrane bound. Versus prokaryotic cells, the only organelle technically they have is ribosomes. So here are some other differences. One, they do vary in size. Eukaryotic cells are a lot bigger than prokaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells include the animal cell. They also include plant cells are also eukaryotic. And then prokaryotes, really simple things like bacteria are a good example. Again, really the only organelle you see here is the ribosome, versus here there are so many different types of organelles in the eukaryotic cell. So here's the difference between them. So like I said, size. Typically prokaryotic cells are about 1 to 10. Remember, that stands for micrometers, versus eukaryotic cells can be anywhere from 10 to 100 micrometers on average. Remember those membrane-bound organelles. Prokaryotes only have ribosomes, versus eukaryotic cells have many organelles, and we're going to talk all about those organelles later. If I scroll down, these are all the different types of organelles we're going to talk about, which is a lot, okay? Those are all the different, remember, organelle means tiny organ, and they all have specific jobs in the cell. DNA, a prokaryotic cell has what we call a nucleoid region. It's just an area here where the DNA is found. It's not contained within anything. So prokaryotic cells don't have, there's no nucleus. It's just kind of their DNA is floating around, versus in our cells as eukaryotes, DNA is found in the nucleus. So up here, and this is the nucleus right here, this is where you would find the DNA would be inside of that. And we'll get more in detail with that later. Examples can include bacteria are a really good example. You saw the blue bacteria, also called blue-green algae. Those are good examples of prokaryotes. They're very simple. And all prokaryotes are unicellular. There's no multicellular prokaryotes out there. Versus eukaryotes can be unicellular. Also, the amoeba is included in this. Protista, paramecium are examples. Fungi, some of them. Fungi, plants, animals, multicellular organisms are also eukaryotic. Prokaryotic cells, again, all cells have a cell membrane, period. It's just that prokaryotic cells, in addition to that, all of them have a cell wall, and only some eukaryotes have a cell wall. Not all. Plant cells have a cell wall, and fungi also have a cell wall too. So those are the differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Make sure you know all those differences for the test. So as I was saying, cells can come in many different shapes and sizes, and there's a reason for that. And it's that the structure, so the physical shape, is tied directly to the cell's function. So by that, I mean whatever its job is. So cells have a certain shape, structure, or even size in order to carry out a specific job. So in humans, like our eukaryotic cells, we have a couple good examples of that. The first is red blood cells. So red blood cells, if you look at them, they almost look like these little donut shapes. They're round, and there's a reason for that shape. It's so that inside of your blood vessels, they can easily slide past each other and move through really narrow areas such as capillaries, which are very small blood vessels. This is the one example in the body of a cell that doesn't actually have a nucleus, because we take that part out so that we can have more room for hemoglobin, which is a protein that carries oxygen, because that's the job of red blood cells, is to deliver oxygen to all the different parts of the body. Versus skin cells have a very flat structure, and they could form all of these layers because of that flat structure. We call this squamous. And again, because of this, they can easily stack on top of each other to form these layers, to form a barrier, a protective barrier between like the inside and outside of your body. So that's why they have that shape. Versus here we have a neuron, a nerve cell or brain cell, and notice that it has these really long branching structures. And that makes sense because the job, well, let's start with the structure. The structure, they have a lot of these branches, okay? And that makes sense because the function, the job of a brain cell, nerve cell, is to communicate over long distances in the body. I mean, sending a signal from your brain to a different part of your body to tell it what to do. That would be another example of how the structure is tied to a cell's function.